My son-in-law leaned into the microphone at the family court in Frederick County, Maryland, on the morning of my custody hearing, and he said the sentence that ended his marriage in 11 words. He said, "Your Honor, my mother-in-law can barely walk. She uses a cane." He said it into the microphone. He said it loud enough for the gallery to hear. And then, this is the part I will remember for the rest of my life. He turned around, in the plaintiff's chair, and he smiled at me. He smiled at me the way a man smiles when he thinks he has just won something. I was sitting in the second row of the gallery. I was 71 years old. I was wearing a navy blue blazer over a white blouse, and I was holding, across my lap, the walking cane my granddaughter Emma had painted for me on my 68th birthday. Pale blue with small yellow daisies she had drawn along the shaft with a paint pen. I did not react. I did not react because I already knew what Judge Harriet Cole had on her desk. I already knew what the file in front of her contained, and I already knew, because my lawyer had warned me 48 hours earlier, what the judge was about to do. She was going to read a piece of paper out loud, and my son-in-law had no idea it existed. The family. My name is Margaret Sullivan. My friends call me Peggy. I am 71 years old. I live in a small ranch house on 2 acres outside of Frederick, Maryland, with a Labrador named Buster, and a garden that I can no longer fully maintain, but that I refuse to give up. I retired from the United States Army Nurse Corps in 1998, after 26 years of service. I have a daughter. Her name is Catherine. She is 43 years old. She was married, until 8 months ago, to a man named Brett Halloran. Brett is 39. He works in commercial real estate. And I need to tell you about him, because you cannot understand what happened in that courtroom without understanding Brett. I did not like Brett from the first afternoon I met him. I want to be honest about that, because I think a lot of mothers watching this will recognize what I am about to describe. Brett was not obviously cruel. He was not obviously a bad man. He was, on the surface, everything my daughter said she wanted. Tall, employed, handsome, from a good family in Baltimore County. He had a firm handshake. He looked me in the eye. He brought a bottle of wine to our first dinner and asked polite questions about my garden. But there is a thing that mothers of a certain age notice, and I noticed it in Brett within about 45 minutes of meeting him. Brett had 2 versions of his face. The face he used when Catherine was in the room, and the face he used when Catherine had gone to the kitchen to check on the roast. The face he used when Catherine was gone was harder. It was quicker to smirk. It was quicker to interrupt. It was the face of a man who was performing kindness, and who did not think, because I was old, and I was a woman, and I was, in his eyes, unimportant, that his performance needed to be as careful with me. I did not say anything to Catherine. I did not say anything because Catherine was 34 years old, and she was in love, and she was going to marry Brett whether I liked him or not. My own mother had once told me, after her funeral actually, in a letter she had left for me, that the greatest gift a mother could give her adult daughter was the right to make her own mistakes without being told, in advance, that they were mistakes. Catherine and Brett married in 2016. For the first 4 years, Brett was, if not warm to me, at least polite. He attended the family Christmases. He came to my 70th birthday party. He tolerated Catherine's Sunday dinners at my house, though he made it clear, through small comments and small sighs, that he considered them a waste of a weekend afternoon. Emma was born in 2019. Emma is my only grandchild. She is 6 years old. She has her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, and a laugh that sounds like a small bell. She was, from the day she was born, the light of my life. And Catherine, knowing this, knowing that Emma was the reason I had bought the ranch house outside of Frederick to be closer to them, began, in about 2020, to drop Emma off at my house on Wednesday afternoons and every other Saturday. Emma and I built a life on those Wednesdays and Saturdays. I taught her how to make pancakes. I taught her the names of the birds at the feeder outside the kitchen window. I read her the entire Ramona Quimby series over a period of 11 months. I gave her a small patch of my garden to plant her own vegetables in. She chose tomatoes and pumpkins, and one summer, she grew a pumpkin so large that Brett, when he came to pick her up, refused to put it in the car because he said it would smell up the trunk. Emma cried. I put the pumpkin in my car and drove it to their house myself. I did not say anything to Brett. Then, in the fall of 2023, something happened to me. I was walking Buster on a Sunday morning in October. I was 70 years old. I thought, In reasonable health for a 70-year-old woman who had spent 26 years on her feet in army hospitals. Buster saw a rabbit. He pulled. I fell. I fell hard. I broke my left hip. I want to explain something about hip fractures in women of my age, because it is relevant. A broken hip at 70 is a serious injury. It requires surgery. It requires months of physical therapy. It requires, and this is the part that mattered to Brett, a cane. Sometimes permanently. I had surgery on October 17, 2023. I spent 9 days in the hospital and 6 weeks in a rehabilitation facility. Emma visited me every Wednesday. She brought me drawings. She brought me a bookmark she had made out of construction paper. She sat on the end of my hospital bed and read to me, haltingly, at 4 years old out of a picture book she had memorized, for 40 minutes at a time. Catherine visited me too. Catherine came every day for the first 2 weeks. Catherine cried in my hospital room. Catherine held my hand. Brett visited me twice. He visited me on the day of my surgery, for 11 minutes, and again, 3 weeks later, when he came to pick up Catherine after her Sunday visit. He stood in the doorway of my rehab room. He looked at me in the bed. He looked at the walker beside the bed. He looked at the physical therapy schedule on the wall. And he said, in a voice that was meant to sound sympathetic, but that landed exactly the way he intended it to land. Peggy, wow, this is a lot. You're going to need real help going forward, huh? I said, Brett, I'm going to be fine. He said, well, we'll see. 6 weeks later, Catherine told me that Brett had suggested, at their dinner table, that maybe Emma should stop coming to my house on Wednesdays, just for a while, just until I was steadier. Catherine said no. Brett dropped it. But I understood in that moment what Brett had started to see. Brett had started to see my cane, and my new slowness, and my healing hip, and he had started to calculate. He had started to calculate what my presence in Emma's life would look like if his marriage to Catherine ever ended. He had started to build a case, and I had, without knowing it, become a piece of evidence. The divorce Catherine filed for divorce in September of last year. I want to tell you why, because it matters for the courtroom. Catherine did not file because of anything I saw or noticed. She filed because, in August of last year, she came home from a dental appointment 3 hours earlier than expected and found Brett in their living room with a woman named Chelsea Downing, a real estate agent from his brokerage. They were not, when Catherine walked in, doing anything a jury would need to hear about. But they were doing enough, and had, based on the text messages Catherine found on Brett's phone that night, been doing enough for approximately 14 months, that Catherine understood, immediately, what she was looking at. Catherine did not scream. Catherine did not throw anything. Catherine, she is my daughter, and she is her father's daughter, and my late husband Tom was a Baptist deacon from South Carolina. Catherine went upstairs, packed a suitcase for Emma, packed a suitcase for herself, drove to my house, and slept on my couch for 3 nights while she found a lawyer. The lawyer was a woman named Angela Roque. She was in her 50s. She had been recommended to Catherine by a friend at the elementary school. Angela was, and I did not know this at the time, though it became relevant, a Marine Corps veteran. She had served in the Judge Advocate General's Corps from 1994 to 2002. Angela filed the divorce papers on September 14th of last year. Brett did not contest the divorce. What Brett contested was custody. Brett filed a counter-petition asking for primary physical custody of Emma. His argument, laid out in a 14-page document his lawyer submitted to Frederick County Family Court in November, was that Catherine had become emotionally unstable following the discovery of his affair, that she had excessive reliance on her aging mother for childcare, and that Emma's Wednesday and Saturday visits to my house represented an unhealthy attachment to a grandparent with significant physical limitations. The phrase significant physical limitations appeared 4 times in Brett's counter-petition. I read the petition in Angela Roque's office in early December. Catherine was there. Angela was there. Angela pushed a copy of the petition across her desk to me and let me read it in silence. When I was done, she said, "Peggy, what do you want to do?" I said, "Angela, what are our options?" Angela said, "Peggy, Brett is going to make you the centerpiece of his custody argument. He is going to argue that Emma's time with you is dangerous. He is going to argue that you cannot properly supervise her. He is going to argue that your cane and your slower gait and your hip surgery are evidence that you should not be permitted unsupervised time with a 6-year-old. He is going to bring pictures. He is going to bring the medical records he obtained from your surgeon through discovery. And unless we prepare a response, he is going to make the family court believe him. I said, Angela, what do you recommend? Angela was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Peggy, Catherine has told me some things about you that I would like to confirm. I said, what things? Angela said, she told me you served in the Army Nurse Corps. 26 years. I said, that's correct. Angela said, she told me you deployed. More than once. I said, 4 times. Vietnam in 1972, Grenada in 1983, the Gulf in 1991, Bosnia in 1995. Angela said, she told me you received decorations. I said, yes. Angela said, Peggy, can you tell me, and please understand, I am asking as your lawyer, what decorations you received? I looked at Catherine. Catherine was watching me. My daughter had known, all her life, that I had been in the army. She had known I had deployed. She had known I had come home. She did not know, because I had never told her, and because my late husband had never told her, and because the box in my closet had been locked for 53 years. What had happened to me in Vietnam in 1972? I looked back at Angela. I said, Angela, I received the Bronze Star. I received the Army Commendation Medal, twice. I received 2 Meritorious Service Medals. I received the Defense Meritorious Service Medal for Bosnia. Angela said, anything else, Peggy? I was silent for a long moment. Then I said, yes. Angela said, would you like to tell me? I said, in September of 1972, I was a first lieutenant, assigned to the 12th Evacuation Hospital in Cu Chi, Vietnam. The hospital was attacked with mortar fire during a mass casualty event. I was working in the triage tent. A mortar round hit approximately 11 meters from the triage tent. I sustained shrapnel wounds to my back, my left leg, and my scalp. I continued working in triage for approximately 3 hours before I collapsed and was medevaced to Long Bin. I received the Purple Heart for the injury. Catherine made a sound. Small, involuntary. She had never heard this. Angela did not react. She simply picked up her pen. She wrote something on her legal pad. Then she said, Peggy, I need to ask you a difficult question. Do you have documentation? I said, I have the Purple Heart itself in a wooden box in my bedroom closet. I have the citation. I have the medical records from Long Bin. I have my DD-214, which lists the decoration. My late husband knew. My daughter, until this moment, did not. Angela nodded slowly. She said, Peggy, may I have copies of all of it? I said, yes. Why? Angela said, because your son-in-law is planning to walk into Judge Cole's courtroom in 3 months and argue that a Vietnam-era combat-wounded Purple Heart recipient is unfit to supervise her own granddaughter because she uses a cane. And I want Judge Cole to have the full picture before Brett opens his mouth. Catherine started crying. I looked at my daughter. I said, Catherine, I am sorry I never told you. Catherine said, Mama, why didn't you? I said, because I did not want you to grow up looking at me and seeing the wounds. I wanted you to grow up looking at me and seeing your mother. I thought the wounds would be too heavy for you. I thought I would tell you when you were older. And then when you were older, I could not find the right time. And then Tom died and it seemed too late. And then Emma was born. And I decided the wounds should stay in the closet, where they had been for 50 years. I am sorry, Catherine. I am so sorry. Catherine came around Angela's desk. She sat down on the floor next to my chair. She put her head on my knee. Angela closed her legal pad. She said, very quietly, Peggy, I want you to go home tonight and get those documents. I want you to make copies, and I want you to bring them to me tomorrow morning, because Brett Halloran is about to make the worst mistake of his life, and Judge Harriet Cole is going to make sure of it. The courtroom. The custody hearing was set for the morning of March 4th. Frederick County Family Court, Courtroom 3B. Judge Harriet Cole presiding. I arrived at 8:47 a.m. I was wearing a navy blue blazer over a white blouse. I was holding the cane Emma had painted for me, pale blue, with the little yellow daisies. I was not carrying anything else. Angela had told me not to bring the shadow box, or the citation, or any of the documents. She had said, Peggy, all of that has already been filed with the court. When you walk in that room, I want you to walk in as Emma's grandmother. Nothing else. Do you understand? I understood. I sat in the second row of the gallery. Catherine sat next to me. She was in a gray suit. She was pale. She held my hand for most of the hour before Judge Cole called the case. Brett and his lawyer, a man named Marcus Pettibone, mid-40s, expensive suit, expensive haircut, were at the plaintiff's table. Brett was wearing a navy suit. He kept turning around in his chair to look at the gallery. He was, I realized, checking to see if his mother had arrived. She had said she would, but I did not see her. Chelsea Downing was not in the courtroom. At 9:03, Judge Cole entered. Judge Harriet Cole was in her early 60s. Silver gray hair pulled back, half-moon reading glasses on a beaded chain. She had been on the Frederick County bench for 19 years. She had a reputation, Angela had told me, for two things: being exceptionally patient with children in custody cases and being exceptionally impatient with attorneys who wasted her time. Judge Cole sat down. She adjusted her robe. She asked the bailiff to call the case. The bailiff read, "Case number 24, FCV 3841. In the matter of the custody of Emma Grace Halloran. Halloran versus Halloran." Judge Cole said, "Counsel for the plaintiff. You may proceed with opening arguments." Marcus Pettibone stood up. He gave his opening statement. It was, I have to admit, professionally delivered. He spoke for 8 minutes. He argued that Catherine had been emotionally destabilized by the discovery of Brett's affair. He argued that Emma had shown signs of behavioral regression, a claim, I would later learn, that was based on the fact that Emma had wet the bed once in October, 3 days after Catherine and Brett had told her they were getting divorced. He argued that Catherine relied excessively on the childcare of an elderly and physically impaired grandparent. He said the word impaired twice. Then he said, "Your Honor, my client would like to make a brief statement to the court, if permitted." Judge Cole raised one eyebrow. She said, "Mr. Halloran, you are aware that this is unusual?" Brett said, "Yes, Your Honor. I would like the court to understand what my daughter is exposed to." Judge Cole was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Halloran, you may make a brief statement. Please stand and speak into the microphone." Brett stood up. He walked to the microphone at the plaintiff's table, and he said the sentence that ended his marriage in 11 words. He said, "Your Honor, my mother-in-law can barely walk. She uses a cane." He said it into the microphone. He said it loud enough for the gallery to hear, and then he turned around, in the plaintiff's chair. No, not the chair. He was standing at the microphone. He turned around while still standing at the microphone, and he looked directly at me in the second row of the gallery. He smiled. Judge Cole did not react immediately. She did not, as I had half expected, snap at him. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at Brett for a long moment. Then she looked down at the file in front of her. She turned a page. She turned a second page. She turned to a third page. A page that, from where I was sitting, appeared to be a cream-colored document with a blue seal I could see from 20 feet away. She looked up. She said, "Mr. Halloran, please sit down." Brett sat down. Judge Cole took off her reading glasses. She set them on the bench. She looked at Marcus Pettibone. She said, "Mr. Pettibone, before we proceed with the defense's opening arguments, I would like to enter a document into the record. Bailiff, would you please bring me the file marked Defense Exhibit 7? The bailiff walked to a table beside the bench, picked up a small manila folder, and handed it to Judge Cole. Judge Cole opened it. She said, "Defense Exhibit 7 is a copy of a military decoration citation from the United States Department of the Army, dated November 14, 1972. It has been authenticated by the National Personnel Records Center and by the Office of the Army Center of Military History. The recipient of the decoration is present in this courtroom." She looked up. She said, "Mrs. Sullivan, would you please stand?" I stood up, slowly, using the cane. Judge Cole said, "Mrs. Sullivan, thank you. Please remain standing while I read this into the record." She put her reading glasses back on. She read, "For meritorious action in the Republic of Vietnam, on the 8th of September 1972, First Lieutenant Margaret A. Sullivan, Army Nurse Corps, assigned to the 12th Evacuation Hospital, Cu Chi, Republic of Vietnam, was on duty in the triage receiving area during a mass casualty event resulting from enemy mortar attack on the hospital compound. At approximately 0347 hours, a mortar round impacted 11 meters from the triage tent, wounding Lieutenant Sullivan with shrapnel to the back, left leg, and scalp. Despite her injuries, Lieutenant Sullivan continued to perform triage on incoming wounded for a period of approximately 3 hours, personally treating 17 casualties before being medically evacuated for treatment of her own wounds. Her actions, in the face of ongoing enemy fire and personal injury, resulted directly in the survival of at least 8 critically wounded soldiers. Lieutenant Sullivan is hereby awarded the Purple Heart for wounds received in action, and is commended for gallantry above and beyond the call of duty in the Army Nurse Corps. Signed, William C. Westmoreland, General, United States Army. The courtroom was silent. Judge Cole took off her reading glasses. She said, "Mrs. Sullivan, please be seated. Thank you for your service to our country." I sat down. Judge Cole turned to Brett. She said, "Mr. Halloran, you stated to this court, under oath, that your mother-in-law can barely walk and uses a cane. You presented this to the court as evidence that Mrs. Sullivan is unfit to supervise a 6-year-old child." Brett said, "Your Honor, I didn't." Judge Cole raised one hand. Brett stopped talking. Judge Cole said, "Mr. Halloran, the cane your mother-in-law uses is a consequence of a hip fracture she suffered in 2023 while walking her dog. The Purple Heart she was awarded is a consequence of shrapnel wounds she sustained in 1972 while continuing to treat wounded American soldiers under enemy mortar fire. Your mother-in-law walked out of a triage tent with shrapnel in her back at the age of 18, and you have come into my courtroom this morning to suggest that at 71, with a cane, she is not fit to make her granddaughter pancakes on Wednesday afternoons." Brett could not speak. Judge Cole looked at Marcus Pettibone. She said, "Mr. Pettibone, do you have anything to add to your opening statement?" Marcus Pettibone stood up. He was pale. He said, "Your Honor, my client withdraws his objection to Mrs. Sullivan's role in the child care arrangement." Judge Cole said, "Mr. Pettibone, that is not what I asked." Marcus Pettibone sat down. Judge Cole picked up the citation. She put it back in the manila folder. She handed the folder back to the bailiff. She said, "The court will now hear from the defense. Ms. Roque, please proceed." The verdict. And after Angela's opening statement took 11 minutes. She did not need to argue about my fitness as a grandmother. Judge Cole had already made that clear. Angela argued instead about custody logistics, school schedules, medical decisions, holiday arrangements. She argued about Brett's affair, about the emotional impact on Emma, about Catherine's financial situation. She argued the way a good lawyer argues when she knows the tone of the courtroom has already shifted. The hearing ended at 11:47 a.m. Judge Cole granted Catherine primary physical custody of Emma. Brett was granted supervised visitation 2 weekends a month. My name, Margaret Sullivan, 71 years old, of 1147 Butterfield Lane, Frederick, Maryland, was entered into the court order as an approved caregiver with unrestricted access. Brett did not look at me on the way out of the courtroom. His mother was in the hallway when we came out. She had arrived late. She was in her late 60s, silver hair, a beige coat. She started to say something to Brett. Brett walked past her without stopping. I walked over to her. I did not know what she had heard. She had not been in the courtroom. I said, "Sandra, it's Peggy. Are you all right?" Sandra looked at me. Her face was pale. She said, "Peggy, I don't know what happened in there. Brett won't tell me." I said, "Sandra, I think you should ask your son what he said about me under oath. And I think you should ask him what the judge read into the record afterward. And I think you should tell him, from me, that I hope he uses this as a beginning and not as an ending." Sandra started crying. I patted her arm. I walked out of the courthouse with Catherine. Emma was waiting in the car in the parking lot with Catherine's best friend. She had a coloring book. When she saw us, she rolled down the window and yelled, "Grandma, did we win?" I said, "Yes, sweetheart, we won." Emma said, "Can we get pancakes?" I said, "Yes, we can get pancakes. We got pancakes at a diner on Route 40. Emma ate 3. Catherine cried into her coffee twice. That was 7 months ago. Brett moved to Baltimore 3 months after the hearing. He sees Emma 1 weekend a month now, at his mother's house. The supervised visitation arrangement was, per Angela, a courtesy. The judge had suggested unsupervised weekends were possible, but Catherine had asked for supervised, and Brett had not fought her on it. Chelsea Downing is no longer in Brett's life. I do not know why. I did not ask. Catherine and Emma moved into my ranch house in April. It was Catherine's idea. She said the townhouse where she and Brett had lived was too full of the wrong ghosts. I have 3 bedrooms. She and Emma have the 2 on the east side of the house. I have the one on the west side, with the wooden box in the closet. I opened the wooden box last month. I opened it because Emma had asked to see it. She had been on my knee on the couch. watching a movie, and she had said, out of nowhere, "Grandma, Mommy told me you got hurt in a war a long time ago. Can I see the medal?" I said, "Yes, sweetheart." I got up, I walked to the closet. I got the box, I brought it back to the couch. I opened it. The Purple Heart was on top. It had been sitting in that box for 53 years. It still had the original ribbon. It still had the case, though the case had yellowed with age. Emma looked at it for a long time. She said, "Grandma, does it still hurt?" I said, "Sometimes, sweetheart, not often." She said, "When it hurts, will you tell me?" "So I can bring you your cane?" I said, "Yes, Emma, I will tell you." She kissed the medal, then she kissed my hand. Then she went back to watching the movie. I sat with the box on my lap for the rest of the film. I have not put the box back in the closet. It sits, now, on the small table by my reading chair in the living room, next to a photograph of Tom and a small ceramic dish where I put my earrings at night. Emma likes to look at it when she comes into the living room. She has, twice, asked me to tell her the story of what happened. I have told her a version. A gentle version, appropriate for a 6-year-old. A version that emphasizes the soldiers I helped, and not the shrapnel in my back. I will tell her the full version someday, when she is older, when she can carry it. But for now she is 6. She paints canes with yellow daisies. She sits on my knee. She kisses medals. And that is enough. If you have ever been underestimated because of your age, because of a cane, because of a slower walk or a graying head, or a body that has already carried more than most people know, I want you to leave one word in the comments below. Just one word. The year that you started carrying what you carry. Not what happened, just the year. Because someone in this comment section is going to see your year, and they are going to remember to sit down next to their own grandmother and ask her about hers. And if this story reminded you that the people we underestimate have already survived the things we cannot imagine, subscribe. Because next week, I am telling you about a husband who signed the divorce papers smiling. His lawyer saw my Pentagon clearance and stopped him mid-sentence. I'll see you there.